So far in this series we've been looking at how we, the living, respond to the deceased. But in this episode I'm going to take you one step further. Death is something we all have in common. Wherever we come from, whatever our gender, whatever our creed or whatever our colour. The one thing we all have in common is that one day we are all going to pass away. And it's something that holds a great deal of fear for many people. I'm going to try to relax you a little bit when it comes to your own demise. We're also going to be taking a look at the history of funerals and how they reached the stage that we're at today. I'm Adrian J. Andrews and welcome to Dead But Not Forgotten. Out the entirety of our lives without attending at least one funeral, I would consider you very, very lucky indeed. It's a fact of life that as we get older we lose more friends and more family, and therefore funerals become a more regular occurrence. But how did they all begin? Have we always given the dead the reverence they deserve? Let's find out.
Since Neanderthal man, dating back to 60,000 BC, there have been three rites afforded the dead: a ceremonial send-off for the deceased, a sacred place to be laid to rest, and memorials for the dead. Archaeologists have discovered grave goods, or objects buried with the deceased, from virtually every period in history and prehistory. The ceremony, in whatever form it takes, reminds us of our own mortality, and the grave goods indicate our deep-rooted belief in an afterlife. Whether it be an ancient burial mound or a more recent grave in a cemetery, mankind has always afforded its dead a certain reverence and sacred resting place. Embalming became popular in the 1860s when in America President Abraham Lincoln's travelling funeral grabbed the public attention when it featured his embalmed body. It was around this time that funeral parlours became popular too, despite already having been around for some considerable time. Funeral homes throughout history have traditionally been family owned and run, but in the 21st century a new model is emerging. Corporations are buying funeral homes, keeping their business names, hiring the original owners as managers, and thus giving the illusion that nothing has changed. In the Victorian era, funerals became big business. At the highest level they could bring an entire city to a standstill. But of course, this meant that funeral directors could also charge extortionate amounts for making coffins and conducting the rites. In 1862, a writer for the Leisure Hour said, "In numerous instances, the interment of the dead is in the hands of miscreants, who, it is almost flattery to compare to, vultures or the foulest carrion bird. The morality is, in their hands, to use a plain word, robbery." Of course, we all want the best for our loved ones on their passing, but during the period of mourning we are vulnerable and easily convinced to spend perhaps more than we can afford. Mourning too was big business in the Victorian age. Drapers were in high demand to make mourning clothes. To mourn, one had to dress appropriately, which often meant that an entirely new wardrobe had to be purchased. Women, of course, were expected to mourn and wear the appropriate attire, but were strictly advised not to attend funerals. Cassell's Household Guide in 1878 pointed out that it was something only done by women of the lower classes. Not least of all because it was traditional for the undertaker and his men to partake in an alcoholic tipple before and after the ceremony, and quite often the bearers of the coffin would be stumbling and reeling, something a lady should not witness. Bodies were often laid out at home before the funeral, and in this age before photography really took off, people would keep mementos of the deceased for comfort. Hair would often be taken and featured in mourning jewellery, such as these brooches. Post-mortem photography was a rather elite service provided to the few who could really afford it. This involved the deceased loved one being photographed with the nearest and dearest, as if in life. Curtains were kept closed, and mirrors would either be covered with drapes or turned to the wall. Clocks would also be stopped at the time of death until the mourning period was over. Deep mourning could take up to 2 years, usually only for very close family. This would then be followed by a period of half mourning. The wake originally meant just that. People would sit with the body to watch over it for the period before the funeral, and it dates back as far as the Anglo-Saxons, based on the superstition that the devil would take the body if it wasn't watched over. This period of vigil would often be accompanied by both meditation and refreshment. Unfortunately, wakes soon degenerated into scandalous revelry and drunkenness, and were often open to all, even those from neighbouring parishes, taking the form of fairs. In 1445, Henry VI attempted to suppress markets and fairs on Sundays and other holy days. Traditionally, however, a body would be put under the table with a plate of salt on its chest, salt representing the soul, and food and drink would be served off that table. Funerals, especially in this multicultural age, can take many forms according to religious belief. In spiritualist circles, it's strongly believed that the deceased does attend their own funeral before moving on, so they do hear their own eulogies and they do see who attends. Bearing this in mind then, the ceremony is as much for the deceased as it is for the living. In my opinion, little has changed since Victorian times in traditional funeral services, but they certainly knew how to give someone a good send-off in those days.
It is perhaps understandable that funeral directors are very, very cagey about having their beliefs about what happens after death openly known. It wouldn't be good for business, because obviously they're dealing with many, many different faiths. A couple of months prior to actually filming this episode, I did have the pleasure of interviewing a lady who worked for a funeral directors, and she was quite happy about me to relating her story, providing I didn't film her or mention whom she worked with. This lady in particular is convinced that on a regular basis she is visited by her grandfather, several years deceased. She smells him, she smells his tobacco smoke, she smells his aftershave. She hears strange sounds in her home, experiences things being moved around, and even feels his presence. But as I say, this is not something she would want her customers to know. It has to be said that she may not be representative of everybody who works in the industry. This is a personal view. But in the past I have spoken to other people who work for funeral directors, and it seems that there is a common thread. They do believe that there is something else after living on this plane. I think it's safe to say that all of us at one point in our lives have thought about our own mortality, and not with a little fear. Faiths do their best to paint a picture of what we can expect when we close our eyes on this plane for the final time. But of course none of us will know for sure until we actually experience it. It's something we've experienced many times before. That's why there are so many faiths that are based on reincarnation, the cycle of life. What you're about to see is a little more controversial than I've actually attempted to be in past episodes, and I can assure you that when you see the next episode it's going to be even more so. The following is based on testimonies, as you will see on screen. Keep an open mind. I'm not telling you what to believe, I'm just telling you the results of my studies over the last few years. See what you think.
If you're a skeptic, the following will probably push your boundaries to their limit. What you're about to see and hear is based upon the testimonies of mediums and people who have survived near-death experiences. The spirit world is our true home, and we all go back regularly for visits. This usually happens during periods of very deep sleep. Many of us are not permitted to remember these visits, however, as what we experience could occupy our waking thoughts and interfere with the work that we have to do on this plane. As we enter the dying process, we begin to feel our life's energies being drained. Consequently, we slip in and out of consciousness. This is actually our spirit leaving our body for short intervals, but there is still a connection between our physical and spiritual selves. When the end finally comes, our spirit rises out of our body, and the silver cord that connects the two snaps. For the time being, if others can actually see our spirit, it still resembles our physical body. At this point, many people are met by loved ones who have already passed over. There's a short period of greeting and catching up, and then we're guided towards a very intense white light. Some near-death survivors have reported a tunnel with a light at the end of it, but this doesn't always seem to be the case. On emerging from the other side of that light, many have reported a feeling of intense calm and even overwhelming love. They have also reported an unearthly intensity of colour in their surroundings. In many cases, people have described a bridge from where they have come through the light to open plains beyond. This bridge appears multicoloured and has therefore been given the name of Rainbow Bridge. If you have beloved pets on the other side, you can be sure that they've been cared for in our absence. You can also be sure that when you return home, a reunion with them is guaranteed. One of the first buildings that we encounter is the Hall of Records, in which every person's blueprint for their earthly lives are stored and can be accessed by close friends and family at any time. There are also the Hall of Justice and the Hall of Wisdom. Behind the halls are two identical towers constructed of white marble and blue glass. The towers are essential to the care of new arrivals, providing psychological and emotional care. They also provide space for convalescence. The topography of the spirit world is much the same as our own, as it occupies the same space, only 3 feet above our own. Whatever age one died at, In general, people on the other side normally appear to be around their mid-30s. If they choose to appear to the living, they adjust their appearance so that they are more easily recognised. Our home in the spirit world can be as we choose it to be. If we loved our house in life, we can replicate it over there. There are no shops, of course, because in the spirit world there is no economy. Because there is no need to reproduce, sex doesn't happen. But if two people are particularly in love with each other, two souls can choose to merge with each other, sharing their every thought, experience, emotion, and feeling. This is said to be the most fulfilling and intense sensation you could ever imagine. The experience of seeing your own life flash before your eyes isn't at the point of physical death as many suspect. It generally happens once you're up to full strength on the other side. When you feel ready, you can relax and watch as your most recent life plays out before your very eyes. It is you, yourself, who judges whether or not you have been good or bad, and have achieved what you set out to. Each earthly life is a step towards graduation in the world of spirit. We can choose to be reincarnated as often as required for us to achieve the highest level. Ultimately, we hope to become spirit guides or wise elders on the other side. So we sit down and weigh up what we have gained so far and the lessons we have yet to learn. And that's when we draw up our new plan in the Hall of Records.
So is that what we can expect when we close our eyes for the final time? I told you a story. Ultimately, the decision is yours as to what you do or do not believe. But many faiths do base themselves on the cycle of life. Life, death, rebirth. My own as well.
Whilst in our earthly bodies, our perception of death is a bleak one. To the average man or woman, our only encounters with it are at the sickbeds or funerals of loved ones. It causes deep hurt, stress, and indeed loneliness. But there are indigenous peoples around the world whose populations embrace death as the natural part of life it is. There are those who use natural substances and ceremonies to put them in touch with their ancestors, spirit guides, or animal guides. But in Western civilization, although we're all born with these same abilities, we generally discourage such activities and even scorn those who do partake. Psychic abilities are attributed to the pineal gland, situated at the centre of our brain. It is often referred to as the third eye. When we are children, our pineal gland is very active, and often when we catch our young ones conversing with someone unseen, we put it down to an active imagination. From around the age of 12, other things begin to occupy our minds, and slowly the pineal gland ceases to function as efficiently. However, in general, we do retain basic intuition. Animals seem to retain their abilities throughout their lives, and often see things we don't. From the point of view of those in the world of spirit, however, there is not such a sense of loss. There is no sense of time like there is on this plane, so they don't feel the sense of loss like we do. They know that a reunion with us isn't too far away. Also, they can look in on us when they like, a luxury that we, unfortunately, do not possess.
I sincerely hope that this episode has brought you a little comfort. In the next episode, we are going to go on beyond the death process and look at why we're actually here and what we're actually studying for. It seems that life is one great big university. That's why we keep coming back to learn more lessons. But what's it all building up to? I'll see you next time, where I may have some answers for you. I'm Adrian J. Andrews, and you've been watching Dead But Not Forgotten. Goodbye for now.